Hello and welcome. My name's Amanda and I'm happy that you're here. Are you a fan of scary stories? Well, I've got one for you today. We've been reading stories out of 100 Wild Little Weird Tales this fall, and I've done our random number generation for today. The number was 67. And just an FYI, this is purely for fun. Please don't sue me for copyright infringement. We're all just trying to have a good time here. And to give you a little bit of backstory, these stories were compiled from a magazine called Weird Tales, which published stories from 1923 to 1954. So if they sound a little bit dated, you've got your answer why. So if that sounds good to you, grab a beverage, kick back, and let's get into it. Off the Map by Rex Dolphin. Off the map. It sounds ominous already. Excuse my shivers, but it's good to sit down over a cigarette and recover my wits and talk to someone who can perhaps persuade me that it never happened. I often knock about the countryside, looking out unusual and picturesque places, and one of my pleasures in an old English town is to haunt the second-hand bookshops in search of local lore. See this? Yes, it's an old map, 17th century to be exact, and I found it in a musty old shop in a part of the country I'd better not mention. No, this has nothing to do with buried treasure, though to be truthful, it does concern some gold guineas. Guineas that no one will touch. Give you the chance? Maybe, but there's something you should know first. Here on the map are 3 villages. Let's call them Bergholm, Winchburn, and Irvington. Bergholm and Irvington you can still find on modern maps. You look in vain for Winchburn. Where has it gone, you ask? That's the whole point. As you see, Winchburn lay between the other 2 villages, but today's large-scale map will show you nothing but wild and wasteland, moor, hill, and bog. Intrigued by this, I searched encyclopedias and guidebooks, old and new, but not a word about Winchburn. There seemed to be a conspiracy of silence wrapped around the place, and I began to wonder if it had ever existed except in the old mapmaker's imagination. Or due to the primitive cartographic methods of the day, it had been placed many miles from its true site and now bore a different name. That disastrous curiosity made me take a train to the nearest town and hike 6 miles to Bergholm. This place was little more than a hamlet, with no church, chapel, or pub. The weather that late summer afternoon was Novemberish, damp with a swirling mist, and the sun giving up his efforts in disgust. After the long walk, the sudden ending of exercise made me chilly, and the need for refreshment was evident. I searched the dismal village for the usual battered and ill-written "Teas" sign, without which no English village, however small, is complete. There wasn't one in Bergholm, so it would have to be a cottage. They all looked equally unfriendly. I picked one and knocked at the door. It was opened by a thin-faced, middle-aged woman who said, "Well?" A ragged, staring little girl appeared beside her, and in the background, a brawny farm laborer. "Excuse me, but can you provide me with a tea?" I asked politely. She didn't answer. Instead, the man came nearer and said, in a pointedly unfriendly manner, "What are you doing in Bergholm anyways, mister? Nobody ever comes here." Since I never dress in a conventional hiker's kit, perhaps the question was understandable. "Just hiking," I replied, "and I've got hungry and thirsty." "Ha," said the man, and they all looked at me as if I were being from another world. "I'll pay you well." That turned the trick. "All right, come in." "Thanks." It was a silent meal. All attempts at conversation failed. As I ate, they sat and watched every movement of my face and hands, and though, to be fair, the food was good and plentiful, it was the most uncomfortable meal I'd ever had. At the end, I made one more attempt. "What is the quickest way to Irvington?" The inevitable answer. "Why'd you want to go to Irvington, mister?" "I'm just walking for pleasure. seeing the countryside. Can't you understand that? No. But he gave me the route to Irvington all the same. It was a roundabout way and entailed going backwards to get forwards. Can't I get there across country then? I asked. Not if you don't want to get lost. Surely there must be some sort of footpath? I asked. And then came what I had been leading to. After all, long ago there used to be a village, probably in ruins now, between here and Irvington. A look, queer, of suppressed horror, came to the faces of the man and woman. A place called Witchburn. The woman went dead white. The man made the sign of the cross and said in an unnatural voice, "There are some places that don't do to talk about, mister. You better go." "What's the matter with Witchburn?" I persisted. The man got up, stood between me and his family. "Go," he said, and almost pushed me through the doorway. As I walked away, I saw their terrified faces watching me from behind the curtain. The air seemed to get grayer and colder as I passed the last few huddled cottages that marked the end of the village, the end that, according to the old map, led past the entrance to the Witchburn Road. There was a sound now, that of shuffling and of sticks tapping on the pebbled road. It came towards me. It came out of the swirling mist, a bent old man making wearily for home. He must have been 80, to judge by his folded and lined face and deep-set rheumy eyes, which he turned questingly in my direction. His tattered black coat hung loosely on his body. I stopped. So did his shuffling. "Should there be," I said loudly, for I imagined he would certainly be deaf, "be a road leading to Witchburn somewhere along here?" Dead silence for a few seconds, the silence of utter shock. Then he dropped his sticks and ran. Yes, this old man ran. Towards the village, hoppity-hop, like a crippled crow, his coat flapping about him. My first feeling was to laugh, both at the idea and the spectacle. Then I checked myself. What, other than intense fear, could have given those withered legs wings? What was there about the mere name of Witchburn that inspired terror? I shrugged my shoulders to myself and persuaded myself that country superstitions, whatever they were in this case, were sheer nonsense. Well clear out of the village now, I seemed to be in a deserted land. Getting out my maps, I checked my position. Yes, just around here, perhaps 50 yards along the left, should be the road or track to Witchburn. Then the mist closed about me like a blanket dropped over my head. This is where, if I hadn't been dead stupid or hungry with curiosity, I should have turned back to the comparative civilization of Bergholm. Instead, I searched around and found what seemed to be a rough track. I got out my compass, set a course, and went into the fog. What I had struck I don't know, but I stumbled over rocks, tore my trousers in thorn bushes, sank up to my ankles in squelch, tripped over what the folk in those parts call potholes, and fell flat on my face more than once. And all these hazards were invisible. Sweat poured off me from sheer pig-headedness and exhaustion. How long this lasted I could not judge, but just as I said to myself, "Stop it, fool, you're all in," I seemed to come to the end of the difficulties and found beneath my feet a level although still stony track. All my strength flowed back in. Then, from far ahead in the mist, came the thin flowing notes of a fiddle, playing some kind of an old country jig. Then, faintly, the ebb and flow of voices raised in revelry, as if merry England were here again. The road led steeply down into the valley, but still nothing could be seen. The sounds of merriment got nearer and nearer, and finally I felt, I'm here. Very gradually the mist cleared, and there it was, Witchburn. A compact little village, nestling under the surrounding steep cliff-like hills, almost as if a giant had scooped out a spoonful of the earth's surface and dropped the village neatly into the cavity. The houses were grouped around a neat village green on which the fiddlers were playing and a merry crowd dancing. Girls and men, all dressed in the colorful clothes of Restoration days. There wasn't a thing modern in the place, from the rose-covered timber and white cottages to the horse wagons parked in the inn yard. What could there be about this place to inspire terror? Witchburn was charming. But what was its secret? Was it a lost village? A place that was unknown to outsiders, that had resisted the inroads of modern progress, had become cut off and was so completely self-contained as to be capable of carrying on an independent existence? It was inaccessible enough, and its approaches certainly didn't invite visitors, let alone motor traffic. Surveyors, map makers, census takers, county planners? How could all these have overlooked its existence? Yet the fact remained that it didn't exist in present-day records. The mist. Perhaps that explained it. If Witchburn was permanently hid from view from both land and air, all these things were conceivable. I moved towards the inn yard, stood looking at the scene, now close up, and a strange feeling of timelessness and not of being myself came over me. Everything now was larger than life, over-intimate, and as I threaded among the people, I saw their faces close to mine, felt the push of their bodies, and the air was full of their rich voices and laughter and snatches of song and music. There was, too, an indefinable odor, a thing one notices only among people of a different race. A different race? Okay. I feel like this paragraph is like setting us up to like, I felt the people, I heard I smelled the people were real to me. I feel like that's what we're setting up here. Suddenly, a face turned towards me, and eyes looked straight into mine. It was a heavy countryman's face, but full of dignity and independence, and the wide-brimmed tall feather hat added to its stature. "What do ye here, stranger?" the man asked, in accents I'd never heard before. "Traveling," I answered. "What goes on here? A carnival?" "And whence come ye, stranger?" "From London." "From London?" he echoed, and there was a gasp in his voice. Then he shouted to the crowd, "The stranger comes from London." The crowd took up the words in a kind of prolonged echo. "From London! From London!" The words hummed around for some seconds, then the music stopped. The laughter stopped. The voices stopped. From a window above the inn, a low wailing shriek started, gathering strength and building up to a horrible scream that ended abruptly in a choking sob. I looked, and saw it had been uttered by a girl whose beautiful face now expressed final hopelessness. 100 faces seemed to turn in my direction, seemingly all accusing me of some awful crime. And indeed, there was a feeling of guilt on me, but guilt of just what I didn't know, although I felt I should have knowledge. The people now seemed to peel away from me until I was left isolated on the green. The man who had spoken to me vanished. Now, he suddenly reappeared at the head of a small group of purposeful-looking men. They all wore long staves, and foremost, my man, lunged at me with his, catching me with a painful blow under the heart. "What means this?" I gasped in anger. Fear was to come later. "Be gone, bringer of evil," he roared. And they all set about me with the staves, not one man coming near enough to touch me with his hands. Argument was futile. I turned and ran while I still had brains in my head and whole bones in my legs. Crash, crash, they hit me with their sticks as they pursued. I stumbled over rocks and tree roots as I made the rough ascent out of the village in the opposite direction to that from which I had entered. I fell, was beaten all over, rose, ran, fell again, a deadly, killing repetition. In the middle of all of this, the mist closed about me again, and still those fiends hounded me. I must have run miles. I fell for the last time. I was finished. I tried to rise. It was useless. A savage flurry of blows rained on my head. Then, blackout. When I regained my senses, I was lying flat, face down on the hard rock, soaked to the skin with mist and bruised all over. A few inches from my eyes, lying on the stony ground, was what I took at first to be a much-weathered halfpenny. I reached out for it painfully. I suppose it's human instinct to pick up a coin, however valueless. Scraped it and rubbed it clean on my tattered sleeve. I sat up sharply, my distress gone. It was a Charles II golden guinea, and there was another, and another. 5 altogether I found, and the remnants of metal buckles, which seemed to argue a whole leather bag full of coins. The others were no doubt scattered around or buried. I told myself I would come back here later and search properly. Meantime, my exhaustion had returned, and I had to get to shelter if I wasn't to die of exposure. There was some sort of track here, and I followed it as best as I could. Presently, still with the thick mist hiding everything, I felt my feet touch tarmac, and I pushed on, miles it seemed, till a glimmer ahead showed another village. This, I knew, must be Irvington, last of the 3 villages on the map. A hanging sign, unreadable in the mist, appeared ahead, and below it the welcome warmth of lights, and soon I heard the friendly undertone of casual inn-conversation. I walked in, feeling like a second-hand scarecrow that the crows have defeated. The conversation stopped. A few customers, all seated, stared at me. The landlord, a shrewd-looking, puckered-faced short man, stopped polishing a glass. His look was enough questions. "Witchburn," I muttered. "What is Witchburn? Can anybody tell me? I've just got back." The drinkers all stood up, as if drilled, edged their way around me one by one, and dashed out into the road. I gazed after them. When I looked back to the bar, the landlord had laid a double-barreled shotgun meaningly across it, the snouts in my direction. "Stay," he rasped. "Don't move an inch nearer to my bar." "Look," I said desperately, "I'm sick of these riddles. Everything that's happened since I arrived in these parts has been inexplicable. Do you know the answer?" He twisted a grin. "I'm no oracle, mister. But though I'm not as dumb as the local population, being a bit of a traveled man and partly educated, I still respect their superstitions. Let's see. Somehow you heard of Witchburn? You tried to find it? You're a Londoner? You found Witchburn and they drove you out, nearly killing you in the process?" I answered every question with a nod. "Yes," he mused. "I suppose it was bound to happen one day." "You've not quite finished," I pointed out. "How, mister?" I fished in my pocket. Where I fell, I found the remains of a leather bag and these. I held up the gold pieces. "My God, that as well? So it isn't just a legend." The last words were muttered almost to himself. He was scared. "Yes. And now the explanation, man," I pressed. "What is Witchburn?" "There's no such place," he said. He lifted the bar flap, picked up the gun, and grunted, "Go through that door and out the backyard, quick." In no condition to argue with a shotgun, I obeyed. "How can you say there's no such place?" I demanded. "After what I've just been through, and what's the meaning of this pantomime?" "There was such a place. Not now. Get undressed." "What?" "Get undressed. Jump in that old butt. Don't argue, man. It's the best I can do for you." "Good. You stay there a minute." He went across the cobbled yard to the back door, returned quickly carrying a can of liquid. He found a long stick, pushed my clothes, still containing the guineas, away from me as I stood shivering in the empty barrel, then poured fluid over them. It was kerosene from the oily stench. A match, a sheet of smoky flame, and my clothes were ashes. What was he gonna do to me? So far I had believed him. He was by far the most rational being I'd met since arriving in the neighborhood. But now, was I dealing with a maniac? Back into the house he went, coming out this time with a large jug and a long hose which was still attached to something inside the house. He pointed the hose at me. Something sprayed out. It was nothing more than water, but almost unbearably hot. "Soap coming over," he called. "Catch." Then he poured the contents of the jug over me in the butt, a very powerful disinfectant by the smell. "Now wash," he ordered, "as thoroughly as you can." "All right," I spluttered. "You seem to know what you're doing, though it still beats me. Now you tell me all about Witchburn." "Nearly 300 years ago," he said slowly, "a traveler set out from London on a horse, carrying all his gold in a leather bag. He was escaping from something and looking for an isolated country hideout where he could stay till the trouble was over. Yes, he found Witchburn. He stayed at the inn there. The first to die was the innkeeper's daughter. They knew he was the cause. They chased him out of the village and beat him to death with the staves. The gold stayed with him. Nobody would touch it. In less than a week, there wasn't a life left in Witchburn. The men of Irvington and Bergholm pitched oil, straw, and everything inflammable they could find into Witchburn from the steep hills around it and set fire to the whole village. Then they rolled boulders around it and filled up the little valley with rocks and earth till not a sign of the village remained. That's the story, and is known to every soul in the 2 villages, and until today, by nobody else. "But what's happened to me?" I cried, shivering. "That's anybody's guess, mister." "And what—" I began, but he vanished into the house again. This time he came back with a rough outfit of clothes, shoes, an old towel, half a bottle of brandy, and some sandwiches. "When you're dressed, get yourself to a doctor and don't use any transport. You might be all right, but there's no telling." "You mean I'm to walk?" I gasped. "Sorry, mister. Yes." "No chance of staying the night?" "Ugh, not likely. You see, these things happened in 1665, the year of the Great Plague." "Don't go, my friend. Don't look at me like that. For God's sake." And that's the end of Off the Map. I liked this story. It reminds me of the M. Night Shyamalan movie, The Village, where you have somebody stumble into a town that has been forgotten by the world, that is stuck within a certain time period. So do we think he stumbled into an echo of the past, or do we think he stumbled through time actually back to 1665? What did you think, dear listener? This story is a good example of those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. If horrific things happen and then we refuse to talk about it, the people who come afterwards could very well make the same mistakes. I feel like this story is like knowledge is power. You know, it's fine for them to burn the city to the ground if there's nobody left in it and close it off from the rest of the world. But then you kind of have to talk about it. You can't just say it never existed, because then you have people like the narrator here who will go out of their way to solve the mystery that doesn't need solving. I feel like there's been a lot of books, TV shows, movies with this premise of stumbling into the past and inexplicably being a part of a historic event happening. It's a very popular trope. I quite liked this story. How about you? So, dear listener, do you think our narrator here contracted the Great Plague when he traveled mysteriously back in time? By the way that he's talking to the reader, "Hey, no, wait, don't go, please," you would think that enough time would have passed that he would know if he's infected or not by the time that he's talking to us as the reader. Oh. Well, I sure hope that our narrator here went and saw the doctor and found out he didn't have the plague before he sat down to have a cigarette and smoke and talk with us. We don't need the plague. We don't need another plague. We're over plagues. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe for more videos just like this one. I hope you're having a great autumn, and I will see you in the next video. Ciao.